and live your life today. It doesn't matter what they say.
All right. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Red Lotus Life. We are so excited to continue this conversation with Ennis Barger. As always, we have Sara Elizabeth over here, my co-creator with Red Lotus Life, and then Ennis. We have had such a huge response, Ennis, from the conversations that we've been having. If anyone hasn't seen that yet, it is called Navigating Narcissism, a Healing Dialogue. And it has just been so powerful that people are saying, we want more. And they they actually want to hear more about signs, boundaries, how to navigate when you're in relationships, co-parenting. I mean, just all kinds of things. So thank you so much for coming back today.
I'm honest. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm especially happy to know that people are finding value in the conversation, and it's in some way helping them, or at least validate, the way they felt, or maybe looking back and seeing situations and relationships maybe in a different light and perspective in that regard, and so I'm delighted that that's the case, and I'm so happy to be back, and excited about our conversation today.
Me too. So just to let everybody know, Sara Elizabeth is having a little bit of technical difficulties over there on her end in Kentucky. So if you see her video kind of lagging a little bit, or if you hear the audio kind of lagging a little bit, just know that we know this and this is what she's experiencing. But these conversations with Ennis are so important to us because what we're trying to do is our message here with us doing this, and our intention is to really understand and develop empathy and compassion for the narcissist personality type, personality type, understanding traits and behaviors. And we're so incredibly grateful that Ennis is here with us and is able to really have these discussions with us in such a sovereign way, like all of us actually. So it's powerful. And so thank you. So today, we've been asked, okay, let me start over with what I'm even trying to say here. We've just been having so much feedback on so many different things, and we're starting to understand that this is layered, right? This is layered, this is sensitive topics and subjects. And so we appreciate you being here with us as we begin to just talk and discuss and navigate and go deeper. We're all about depth here in Red Lotus Life. And so we know we're going to very tenderly talk about different things, but this one right here, this discussion is the signs and navigating relationships with awareness and also boundaries, which I don't even know where you guys want to start. Where should we start?
I think one thing we may start with is just a quick like a episode recap for just a second, and I think this will set the stage for some of the discussions, especially when we're talking about recognizing traits, narcissistic type behaviors and traits in people, and so the thumbnail sketch of this is that the core the core cause with narcissism is a false image of self that's been created within the person exhibiting these behaviors, and we can talk about the roots of all that with trauma and hurt, and the saying that hurt people. That's true here. Narcissism doesn't happen in a vacuum. People aren't born, and our spirit isn't created, or spirit isn't embodied when we begin our life with narcissism attached to it. It's something that's conditionally, developed over time. So, but I think the most principal thing that we need to talk about is there is a facade, which is this image that this person has basically created that that they're identifying with that's false, and then everything, and then there's the true nature down here, which is really rooted in unworthiness, self-hatred, shame, regret, all these other pieces that are built on through these trauma experiences. And so that what you're dealing with is you're dealing with a big gap between reality and I say reality, I say the conditioned reality, and then below that we can get into it in another episode, the true self, the essence of who we are at our core. But this person can't even navigate between here to here, let alone deeper down to true essence. And so understand that you're dealing with, in a narcissistic person, you're dealing with some point in between this facade, which is really like the ultimate end game for them to be recognized, that's the image that they want everyone to see them as, and then this truth of really how they feel about themselves. You're dealing with some level of either here or some gradient of that between those two. And when we talk about that, the reason I say that it's a gradient is because when a narcissist is feeling completely in charge of the world, like they've got the tiger by the tail and this facade is working for them, they operate differently than they do when that's been when that image gets tarnished or it gets knocked down a little bit, and that insecurity is more relevant and evident at the surface level. The behavior changes dramatically. And so that's the only reason I kind of want to bring that piece of it up, is setting the stage for how this applies to recognizing narcissistic behaviors. And does anybody have anything to add to that before I kind of roll into the next piece?
No, nailed it.
Go for it.
So one of the tricky things about identifying narcissistic behavior is we most often identify narcissism at, when we see it with the extroverted narcissist. So these are the people like, all those lovely politicians we all like to fight about. Movie stars, big business people, lawyers and things like that, where you see it and it's honestly, it's not that hard to identify when you kind of know just a few of the things to look for. Where it gets much trickier is when you have people who are maybe a little different slice of narcissistic than that. You might have someone who's more of an internal introverted type of a narcissistic behaviors and things like that. So what I'd love to talk about more than anything is what's consistent amongst maybe all of those manifestations of narcissism. And because that's going to be the truest way to pick these things up. If you see someone at a bar and they're buying drinks for everybody and it's all grandiose, and they're wearing the Rolex and their hair's perfectly coiffed and they're buying the most expensive liquor and they drove up in the best, a blind person can see that, right? So those are the easy ones, and so we'll kind of pass by that. The hallmark traits, I think, in narcissism comes down to a predominant obsession with self. That is the first key. I would say that it's the hallmark in every hallmark of every narcissistic person is this consumption with self. And how does the world fit around me? It's a me-centric approach to life. And we could talk about the pathology of that, but it's not necessarily important in this conversation. But just understanding that's where the majority of that thinking that's happening in between their ears is geared around, and it's a protection mechanism. And so that we protect ourselves by propping up this facade. So some ways that you can identify that with people is, number one, you have to become capable of observing people's behavior that digs deeper than the surface level. And you know, part of the issue, forgive me for losing my train of thought here for a second.
Oh, you're good.
Part of the issue deals with an unfortunate truth that in order to walk through this life and protect yourself, you're going to have to learn about personality types and malignancies that you don't own yourself. And we were talking a little bit in the pre-pro, and it goes back to this, you know, this old wisdom that you judge people from your own heart. And so that's a double-edged sword, because, you know, if you see someone consistently worried about being lied to, ripped off, cheated on, all these things, you can pretty reasonably assume that they know that they have that capacity within themselves, because otherwise they wouldn't assume that you had that capacity. But on the flip side of that is, if you're someone who doesn't feel like the rules allow for lying, cheating, stealing, manipulating, and all that, then you also kind of wrongly assume that everyone else operates by those same sets of rules. But the truth is, everybody can manufacture their own set of rules around what they're trying to do to protect themselves, or you know, prop up a false facade, or just protect themselves from trauma, right? And so what I really mean is, you have to understand yourself, but you also have to understand other people. And that means reading deeper than just the surface level of behavior. So when you begin to play, you have to understand the game kind of within the game. And I'll use a sports analogy, because those are the ones that are most readily available in my mind to illustrate this. But there's levels in which you can watch a game. Let's take basketball, for example. There's you know, if you watch basketball at its surface level, you see a lot of people running around the court without the ball. Let's say they're in an offensive set, and you got one player that's dribbling the basketball, one player that's defending that person, but there's 8 other people on the court actively moving constantly around. And unless you understand why they're doing that, it just seems like a lot of busyness. And then someone finally shoots the ball, and either they make it or they don't. The truth of the matter is, this player's cutting over here to drag his defender out of the zone to create a space for another guy to run over to catch a ball, to shoot and be open. So what I'm really talking about in life is, you can watch life at that surface level and just not understand why all this other stuff is happening, and you're really just concentrated kind of on the main thing. But life there's depth in behavior, and so understanding what's the game within the game. And not only can you do that through observation, but you also get really good at asking questions that will cause someone to maybe show their hand a little earlier than they anticipated doing so. And I say this like it's a conscious effort. It's not really a conscious effort. It's a subconscious protection mechanism. And so the tricky thing about dealing with narcissistic people is, understand that at their root, they want to be loved and accepted just the same way that you do. The desire is the same. The way we go about getting to it, totally different. But the desire is consistent. We want to be loved. We want to feel safe. We want to be accepted. So if the core pathology of the whole root of the issue with narcissism is a deep self-hatred, then I will not allow myself to bring the version of myself to you that is unworthy. Because if the goal is to get acceptance, then the last thing I'm going to do is bring the worst. So what I'm going to do, if my life depended on selling a car, and I've got 10 cars out there, I'm going to go out and I'm going to pick the very best car I can. I'm going to polish it. I'm going to make sure it looks like there's no flaws in it. And that's what I want to bring forward to sell. And that's what's happening in these relationships. It's not an intentional deceit of you as a person. It's just they're going to offer you the version of themselves that they think will gain love, acceptance, and safety.
Mm-hmm.
What they don't know is that there's a complete disregard for your need for love, acceptance, and safety in their approach to that. Because anything short of authenticity, it can't bring that. Because I can't love you, care for you, and respect you if I bring a lie to you. I'm selling you a bill of goods that's not true. But they're not thinking through that. So the keys, I think, that stand out to me are to take the approach and the effort to be very intentional, to be present in the conversation with that person, and not only that, to try to see below the surface. And you're going to look for things. They're kind of hallmark pieces that are consistent amongst all of them. Is number one, they see the world from a them-centric viewpoint. So when you hear them talk about people in their lives, situations in their lives, they're generally going to make an effort to always have that thing shine back on them in some favorable way, right? So if let's say they work somewhere and they're struggling at work, it's going to be somebody else's fault. They're going to be smarter than that other person. If people just got it, then there wouldn't be any issues. And if someone doesn't agree, it's either I must not have communicated it correctly, or they're not capable of understanding. Because the only other option is I'm wrong, which isn't going to be on the plate. And so there's going to be a lot of very nuanced ways in which that person will never really fully take accountability for being less than what their image is pushing out there. So that might be embellishments or grandiose recounts of situations, which are twisted and conveyed in a way to make sure that they're never the ones that look bad in that situation. They're generally going to be very attached to their image. So if you want to see below the hood, you may have to poke a little bit at some of the sore spots. And so I saw something about, there was a guy talking about a negotiation tactic, and he said asking questions is never as effective as making a known false statement, because people will break all their own rules to correct someone, even if it includes information that they would not have told you if you asked them. So let me give you an example of that. So if someone were selling something, and what I really wanted to know was why they're selling it, right? So some people would just go, "Hey, so why are you selling this house, or why are you selling this car?" And they don't want to tell you that. It may be that the house has got a bad septic system, or whatever. So what they're just wanting to sell you the product. But if you ask the question, they'll be like, "Oh, we're just moving on," or we changed our priorities, or whatever. But if you say, "Well, I'm assuming you're selling the house because it really needs a lot of, it doesn't really look good, like it's pretty dated, right?" And they're going to go, no, that's not the case. It's because we had some septic issues. So what it is there's this need to be right, and there's this need to correct other people, and narcissists are going to fall into that trap a lot more often than any other personality type, because they're smarter than you, and they want to make sure that you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so just listening to conversations and asking questions, that's good. But what you can also do is you can send out some, what I would call feeler shots or range finding shots to see how people respond, because when they set the tone in the conversation, when they dominate the conversation, they're never going to put themselves into a position to be vulnerable to that sort of thing. And so what you have to do is be very intentional and communicating, and then sending out something, and then catching that response to make sure that it seems to be on par or on the same keel with the image that you're seeing. Because if you start to dig and you start to do these little techniques, and you see that this is the image that they're trying to give you, and what you're seeing is really more around here, that's a red flag, right? And so you have to be a student of the game in that regard. The other things that you will see are going to be, when they talk about people in their life, they're going to talk about them in relationship to them. Meaning, it would be easy to say, my kid is an all-star on the baseball team, right? And so that's generally what they'll lead with. They're going to lead with the piece of that kid that they think most supports that image, right? You see in the connections here. So it's all about maintaining that image. They're going to talk about their job in that way. They might be a janitor, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in their mind, being a janitor doesn't match this, so they're going to embellish their role. I'm a facility sanitation engineer or something like that, right? So you're just going to look for things that just kind of don't really add up, right? And so that I think is the most potent tool, is in that interaction to really cue in and listen to what people are saying. There's all kinds of stuff out on the web as far as how to spot a narcissist, and they're going to say, they're likable at first glance. Not all of them are loud and proud. Some, they'll be guilty of name dropping. Just obvious things. They like nice things. So if somebody's completely and utterly buttoned up, start to finish, the way they're dressed, the way their car is, the way their house looks, and the way their wife looks, and or whatever, their kids, they're always dressed to the T. Look at their social media page. If there's never a bad picture, if there's never a post that isn't anything other than shiny, happy people and the world's perfect and all of these things, or if they do end up giving a nod to something that was maybe less than ideal, the way they're going to tell the story is how they overcame it, because they're wanting to sell you. They're continually selling you this image that isn't true. And again, to remind everyone, they don't know it's not true. And that's why they're so damn convincing at it, because they have convinced themselves that this image is true. And anything deviating from that is an anomaly that has to be fixed immediately. One way that you can identify this and you're kind of setting the playing field. I saw this happen with a business interview, but it's really a brilliant technique to spot character flaws in somebody that you're maybe bringing into your life on a date of some kind, or trying to form a new relationship. But if you're going to meet somewhere for your first date, meet somewhere that you're familiar with, and then hopefully maybe there's somebody there that works there that you either know, or you can get there ahead of them and figure out who your waiter is going to be, or who your server is going to be, and ask that server to intentionally mess up that person's order. Not like spit in it, but just literally make an honest mistake. Okay, if he orders the Caesar, bring him the house salad, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
How people treat Uber drivers, doormen, servers in restaurants, anybody who's providing a service to them, that is one of the things that's one of my biggest key indicators of whether or not I want to have somebody in my life or not. if they dehumanize that person, if they never really acknowledge them, if they are too good to speak to them, if they're short, curt, and dismissive, that's a big red flag for me, even if it's not a narcissistic personality. But a narcissistic personality, I can tell you, they already feel superior to that person because that person's in a certain position of service. So how that person deals with that situation is a great indicator of where that person is in their emotional intelligence. And it may very well tip the flag that there's narcissistic behavior as well. Okay. Look into their history as much as you can. And I know there are people that are just like cyber sleuths. They can know everything about somebody in 12 minutes on the internet if they know their social media handles. I'm not saying, dig apart somebody's life, but if you look back and there's a trail of wreckage behind this person, if it's one relationship, could have been the other person. If it's two relationships, might have been the other person, might have been this person. If it's a series of relationships that have gone awry, at some point you have to look at the common denominator. And the common denominator in that relationship is that person. And so there's a red tide that runs behind narcissistic people. And so do your due diligence on that. Another hallmark piece is, and it's weird because a lot of times outward narcissists don't come across as identifying as victims, but in their core, it's still there. It's a piece of the pathology, because if something goes wrong, it's being done to you. It's not because of something you did. And so one of the things that you'll see is everything is kind of personal to them. Reason being is if you hold yourself in an elevated state and you're more intelligent, you're a bigger winner than really most of the rest of the populace. When things go wrong, it's a shock. And so it has to be because it was personal, and they take it personally. They have a hard time laughing at themselves. They have a hard time seeing a situation as just a situation, and their reaction isn't malleable in their mind. It's the reaction is justified, and so there's no reason to change it. And so if it's being done to you, then you're always just in your reaction, and that's one of the ways that they will justify really horrific behavior, emotional, verbal abuse, and punishing someone. It's because it is personal, even if the reason that you're not shiny happy today has zero to do with them, you're doing it to them, right? And so when you're listening to someone talk about this stuff, if you can recognize in that conversation that they're applying something, a personality, a personalness to something that really isn't personal to them, that's a little bit of a warning sign as well. Just looking at a couple of notes I had here.
You're nailing it.
Yeah.
I love this because we don't do regular red flag stuff, right? We always go deeper than that. And so, yeah, you're totally nailing it. So I do want you to get through all of your notes before we're able to talk about it, because I want to make sure that we get everything that you wanted to share.
Yeah. One of the other signs is going to be, look at their other relationships, and outside of kids who a lot of times don't have any choice but to be in that relationship, you'll find that most of the relationships that person will find important are relationships in which they have the upper hand and leverage in some kind. So a lot of times, and unfortunately, a lot of narcissists are leaders and bosses. That constant need to reassure and build into, fulfill this image. The natural end to that is they've got to move up and they've got to advance, and so they're going to work hard to do all those things, and so they end up being in charge of people when they shouldn't be. And so a lot of times you'll find that most of their friend group is people who they have the control, they have the upper hand on, either their employers, they're their employers, their bosses, or they're in a position where they have things that other person enjoys and needs. And so if you start looking at this person's relationships, and it's really devoid of any substantive relationship in which that person doesn't hold the leverage in that relationship, it's a bad sign. It's a bad sign. And that's one of those deeper things. You have to get back. You have to get past that first date, that second date. We're talking about, weeks into finding in a new relationship, before some of these things start to become more evident. And I think that's where the second part of our subject matter really comes into key, is how do you protect yourself during this evaluation phase, right? And so that's kind of pretty much, I think, where my notes end. Today there's, that you can go to a website and there'll be 60 ways to, anywhere between 5 and 60 ways to identify a narcissist. But what I really wanted to do was bake down into what I think are the most reliable indicators that are common across the different manifestations of narcissism. So with that, I would love to hear you all's take and any questions or any of that.
Sara, do you care if I go first?
Please do. Please do. My internet is not cooperating.
Okay, and then you can definitely, we'll let you say what you need to say, because I can hear your audio just fine. So yeah. Oh my gosh. So thank you for sharing all of that with us. I think I have a whole page of notes as always, but I think what stands out to me with our audience here is this whole piece about awareness, right? Being self-aware, but also aware of others. And it really is this piece about understanding self and other people, being below the surface, not really, what was the term that you used, or the phrase that you used about judging from your own heart?
Right.
Yeah, because that, I think, is also, it's just nature, right? It's just nature for all of us to do that. But when we are the student of the game, that is when we can really discover who it is that we're really in relations with, or who it is that we're meeting for the first time, or that we might possibly think about having relationships with. This idea about the server, that is, or anybody in the service industry, actually, that is a huge indicator of, I guess, let me back up just a little bit. So some of the people in our audience are really new to some of this stuff, while others have been working with this for years and years and have deconditioned and deprogrammed and all the things. But I think a key indicator here is that whole thing of those that are serving others. And that is huge. It's how it is all people. Honestly, it's all people. It's not just anyone with narcissistic behaviors and traits. But that is something that I have found personally in my experiences, that I've noticed with anyone that I've been in relationship with, or friendships with, or any relating with. That is one key indicator that I am noticing that is common there. That is not something where I need to poke at, or I need to do, any of these other very conscious things. I can just be aware of that. And I think we are not taught to really get to know people. We're just not. We're conditioned as a society to just judge from our own heart. And unfortunately, I think that's something that comes up in every organization, right? We can look at it with parenting, of being polite and having manners, to school, to church, all the things. You just always you never want to judge somebody, to not have your best interest in mind. And also, you nailed it whenever you were talking about a lot of this is unconscious and subconscious behaviors, right? None of this is intentional ever, especially in the beginning.
Right.
You're showing the brand new car. In fact, everything that you said about this, again, I'm looking at myself and going, well, I can check that box and I can check that box and check. Like everything that you say, you're telling my story as well, just like what we said in all the other episodes, right? It's always looking at self first and then looking at others. And so it's really cool how you talked about this, because I think honestly, that's what it is just understanding yourself and understanding other people. And I really love that part where you said, you talked about that margin, right? That someone with these behaviors has to work with, and that's what we're seeing and that's what we're navigating with. So tons of amazing points here. I don't know. Sara, what do you have?
Ooh, so much is swirling. This was such a good conversation. Thank you, Ines, for sharing so much in depth, your experience, and then ways that we can really dive in and look at the conditioning that's underneath. I love the verbiage around the game, because that's sort of the way that I see it now as well. The more and more the conditioning is allowed to fall away, the more we can, like, we come to this place of such deep self-awareness. And until we get to that place, we aren't really able to see past the surface of the other's behavior. But that is where the real work lies. And I will say that it's not easy work. It's not easy work to be able to get to this place where we can have these conversations. It takes courage. It takes so much vulnerability. It takes getting really, really, really good and honest with yourself and who you are. And I just want to say that the level of integrity that I feel around the way that you express yourself in these conversations is just so beautiful. Also, have to go back to what Lori is sharing is, yes, always looking in the mirror, always looking in the mirror. There is I can check these boxes off as well. It's just a difference in the way the dynamics are expressed, but also realizing the commonalities really do exist. And I know that's a conversation. We're going to have a deep conversation around that as well. Even I guess I'm going to say the identifying factors, like around relationships and how many relationships are there in the past. But when we are those types of personalities that call in these different dynamics, no matter which expression of that, no matter how that expression looks like, this is also a common theme. It truly is. And it's such an incredibly nuanced, deep conversation that I just want to sit and be with it and go back and listen to the recording again, and just again say so much gratitude for both of you for being here and showing up to have these sacred conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I know that we're going to be running shy on time, and so I maybe just can touch on a couple of things from a protection standpoint. And we can possibly delve deeper into the subject, because I think it merits some great discussion. But just understand that the currency that the narcissist works with is leverage. Okay. And what I mean by that is, and we all experience, no matter where your path is at, there's been a movement to become more true to yourself and shed learn behaviors and defense mechanisms, archetypes, and those sorts of things. But if you can think back to when you might have lived a life that wasn't necessarily true, there was an image you're still maybe trying to push out there, and there's what people don't understand is the amount of energy that it sucks out of our soul every day to prop up that gap. It's exhausting. It is utterly exhausting and draining, and it pulls all that energy out where it's not creating, it's not loving, it's not, it's not doing all the things that the soul was meant to do with that energy. It's just propping up this narrative. And so we all get weary and we all get tired, and narcissists are no different from that. And so the amount of energy it takes to prop up that illusion at its entirety is unsustainable. It's absolutely unsustainable. So what ends up happening is the narcissist will only let you peek behind the curtains when they feel safe that it won't end in rejection. Okay. And if you're at your core, you believe you're not worth loving, then you don't expect someone's not going to reject you. So you're just going to continually move this bar down further and further and further. Again, subconsciously, this is happening. And it happens in direct relationship to how likely they think you are to reject them and leave. Okay. So subconsciously, they are looking to get their hooks into you. And so one of the ways that you can best safeguard yourself while you're trying to figure out if this person that's in your life is someone that you need to be wary of, maybe you don't need to have them in your life at all. Hopefully these hopefully these scenarios are more based in you making a choice as to whether someone enters or stays in your life, as opposed to figuring this out on the fly with someone you're so intrinsically intertwined with that you can't distance yourself truly. And then now you have to really create a bunch of fortified boundaries to operate within that relationship. And maybe that's a conversation that we push to the next, another recording. But in this situation, you can't let yourself become reliant upon the narcissistic, this other person, whether they're overtly narcissistic or just have small narcissistic traits. What you can't do is allow anything about yourself to be reliant upon them to be okay. Okay. So,
Right.
The obvious things are, financial, where you live, what you drive, anything that deals with your external, forming a relationship with your friends, forming a relationship with your kids, in which if you fracture that relationship, you now have to not only worry about how that person is going to react, but then also now, well, how's it going to affect your kids? That's one of the reasons I'm a huge proponent of, if dating in life with kids as a single parent, or a divorcee or whatever, then introducing that person to your kids needs to be a very meticulously calculated decision. And because until you know who they are, your kids damn well shouldn't be exposed to them. And but there's a whole other host of ways they're going to maybe try to help you, get a job, or introduce you to these people that now you're kind of ingrained in their world, and to fracture from them means you lose all these other things as well. And so, what they're constantly doing is kind of range finding to see where you're at, and if they can drop that envelope a little further and you don't bolt, then it's all of a sudden there's a permission to then try to slide a little further down and try to slide it a little further down. And when you get to the point where they're convinced that you have no other option but to stay with them, then you get to see the real version of them. It's usually when no one else was around, because they don't, they're still trying to keep this image going for everybody else, but they don't have to expend that energy any longer. And so the keys there are don't let them have leverage, but there's another leverage. And this one is completely in your court to dictate whether or not they have that leverage or not. And that's the emotional leverage. And so that's really where you've got to shore up your own house. You have to know yourself. You have to know who you are as a person, truly at your essence. And because any amount of your peace and contentment that is derived from your external reality is going to be in play as leverage. And I've got an analogy for that we can cover. I think that aptly kind of describes that we can cover in a more in-depth conversation. But just as a primer to how do you protect yourself as you're in this evaluation process and understanding who you're dealing with is don't put anything on the table that can be that gives them leverage in the relationship. While you're in the evaluation process, string it out as long as you can before you allow any amount of leverage to be put into play, because that like I said, that amount of energy it takes is unsustainable. And so the longer you stay at distance, and another sporting analogy is, if you ever watch a boxing match or MMA fights or anything, what you'll see is a lot of times in the first round, these folks come out and they can fight for 5 rounds without really getting tired. But the first round, there's a lot of this. There's a lot of, they call them feints, and there's a lot of little range finding jabs. And what they're trying to do is they're in this dance in the ring, and they're trying to figure out how to interact without giving up to anything that can possibly hurt them. Right? You don't want to get knocked out in the first round, so you play it cautious and you find range. You get comfortable, and so what you have to do is, in these situations, you have to be that fighter that is not overextending, that is not taking the big punch. They're not getting too close. You're going to control distance. You're going to move your feet. You're going to stick something out to kind of protect yourself, keeping that distance, because we know at some point that facade's going to crack. And what you want to do is you want to be around to observe it and not be the person that's the focus of that crack in the facade. And so that's kind of my 5-minute tips for, how do you protect yourself? Because the worst scenario is you just retract from the world and you don't engage anymore because you don't want to be hurt. That's deeply, deeply sad. And that's not the way we're meant to be on this earth. I don't believe that's the way we're meant to be on this earth. And so let's not shut down. Let's not close ourselves off. We have to be courageous to be able to put ourselves out there, open our hearts, but we can do so intelligently, and we can do so with a regard for ourselves, that we're worth it, the effort to hold ourselves apart, to not give leverage, and to really wait until we know who that other person is before we open ourselves completely to the possibilities of the hurt and the trauma that can come from relationships, even when they're not between 2 dysfunctional people or 1 dysfunctional person. Right. And there's always going to be the opportunity for hurt and loss, even if it's just because you lose that person or whatever. We really miss out on life if we shut off from that, but we can be very strategic and be very intentional. And truthfully, it's a manifestation of how we honor ourselves, how we honor our sovereignty. Holding that out, being patient, being calculated, and being intentional is a reflection, I think, of how we love ourselves. Because if we love ourselves enough to do those things. And so that's what I would implore people to do that are listening to this and trying to kind of navigate through this.
I love that you just talked on all of that, because absolutely 100%, it all comes back to our value, right? It comes back to our value. It comes back to our self-worth. And we're, again, conditioned when we're starting to relate, especially right now. I mean, we can go into so many different topics and so many different areas, but even right now, we're conditioned to think that nothing's sacred, right? Nothing's sacred. We're going to just jump into bed with anybody, and we're just going to do all the things. We're just going to relate, and we're going to do all the things. But when I like what you just said about, it's not protection as in, okay, I'm just not going to relate with anybody. I'm just going to be shut off and be protected from the world and have all these walls up. That's not what we're saying here. What we're saying here is knowing ourselves enough to know our own value and our own worth, to keep people a little bit at a distance. You can keep all your own sovereignty here. I love how you said that as well. And the emotional sovereignty, like is the number one thing. But I have to say too, with the work that Sara Elizabeth and I do, I mean, we all know that all of this is conditioned and imprinted within us at very young ages. And so we'll go deeper into all of these discussions with that too. But it's this, this part about not being reliant on anyone, really, because as you were talking about this, I'm sitting here going, well, I know I can already hear some of the audience. I can hear some of the feedback that's going to happen. They're like, well, yeah, but you're starting to get to know somebody. And what if they just want to help you get a job? And what if they just want to do this and do that? That's okay. People can do that. The difference is when all of a sudden you're noticing that you're losing your own sovereignty, you don't have your own relationships with people, you don't have your own means to take care of yourself in all the ways, but mostly that emotional part. There was one part in particular. I wanted to say this because also I want people to remember this is all subconscious again. Somebody is not doing this consciously. This is all subconscious and it's closing that gap. But it's interesting for me, what I've experienced is something like the job. And there might be a little tiny disagreement or something, but all of a sudden that's leverage and held over my head. They'll bring it up. They'll bring up whatever it was, right? And then the other part around that is when you're with your friends and your people, and then all of a sudden they're saying, well, hey, why don't you, I have this at the same time. Why don't we go do this instead? And you're finding yourself more and more in their world, less and less in your world. And that's, again, okay, except when it's one or the other. When it starts to be one or the other, and you have to start choosing, and you find yourself more over here, because you do want to mesh worlds. You know, you do. You're in relationships. You're learning about somebody. Yeah. So I didn't want anyone to think, well, gosh, am I not supposed to be taking, or not taking, but am I not supposed to be getting to know this person? No, that's the whole point, is you value yourself enough to get to know this person before you jump all in. I think that's one of the biggest things. And also, this is totally off subject, but I think this is probably one of the biggest problems with the twin flame stuff that's happening out there, and the twin flame movement and conversations and everything as well. And that's a whole nother topic, but it's being aware and valuing yourself. And even though you do feel connections with people, it's getting to know them, because right now you're getting that best car version. You want to make sure that it is exactly what you want, and it's where you want it to be.
Yes. Buyer beware. I mean, it's the truth. You have to be your own best advocate. And that's not selfish. It's not selfish in that regard. I think people oftentimes they almost feel guilty for taking care of themselves, and that shouldn't be the case. You are your own best advocate. No one's going to fight for you the way that you should fight for you, and just respecting yourself enough to know that if you're worth being with, then you're worth them waiting to get all of those pieces of you when it's appropriate. That's what I would like to convey to people. You're worth patience. You're worth the time. And so if they don't see that, there's your first indicator you don't need to be in a relationship with them.
The other part,
because it's a me first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other part is the self-awareness of, am I somebody that's doing these things? That's the other piece of us having these conversations, is really looking at self and saying, am I one of these people? Because it is all about self-awareness on all sides. So
yes.
Yeah, there's that too. What about you, Sara Elizabeth? Anything?
I think what I'd like to say, just in regards as number one, being able to really be in emotional sovereignty, that is a huge starting point. Whether or not you are, because sometimes it does take, once you have found yourself in this situation, being able to untangle from the financial part, those other pieces. The number one thing that I would say and agree with Ines on is to be able to take back and then maintain your emotional sovereignty. That is everything. It's so important because until you can get to that place, you can't untangle or unweave anything else. And that's a place that's really hard for many of us that find ourselves in these dynamics to get out of. And for me, that was the number one thing that had to happen. And then just to speak a little, there's so much I could speak to here, but I know that time is of the essence and we will be coming back. But just when we are in these places of sort of getting to know one another and vetting and looking for warning signs and just, feeling into what a relationship would look like, I think ultimately the most important thing to remember is that we're looking at two people who are in their sovereignty, who want to come together to be in a relationship, to co-create something, to be an interdependence, because that is really the goal, right? Interdependence. So we're able to compromise instead of everything being one-sided and the other person just giving everything of themselves, giving everything away. So just remembering that piece, that is important.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Well, I know that there's so much more that we can talk on here, but time is of the essence, and Ines has somewhere else he needs to be as well. And so do I, and so does Sara.
Busy days.
I know. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up, but I think, we will be having some other discussions here. So definitely look for those. Huge gratitude for all of you for being here and listening to this and engaging. Tell us if this is the type of thing that you want to see more of. Please like it, subscribe for the next episode that's going to come out, share it. That's actually the biggest thing. We would love for you to share this with others that would find value in this. And just huge gratitude for Ines. Thank you so much for being in this space with us. We appreciate and love you so much. And is there a way that people can get in touch with you if they want to?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just it's so Enos.barger@gmail. So enos.barger@gmail.com. And I'll love to interact with people, ask questions and answer questions and things of that nature. So by all means, please reach out if there's anything on your mind.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Okay. All right. Well, we hope that everyone has an amazing, fabulous day. Please put your feedback in the comments below, and we'll see you next time. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
And live your life today.